Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening. You're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome to Season 8, Episode 3. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and in this episode, I'll be performing 4 spine-chilling tales for you, all of them from author Ryan Peacock, about freakish farms, death metal, creepy cuisines, and merciless mentalists. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first 2 terrifying tales. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy an extended version of this and other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support. Now, it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail. So lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. The show's about to begin. Our first tale tonight from Ryan Peacock introduces us to a young man who breaks down near the farm of Jonah Price. Price is an interesting fellow, but what he's up to on his farm is anything but praiseworthy. Without further ado, I present to you When the Pigs Scream. I'm used to late nights. My job means a lot to me, so obviously I want to keep it, and that means putting my all into it when things get busy. If that means I get home at 9 or 10, that's just fine. Success has a price. I'm hardly a workaholic. Actually, my dad always thought I was lazy. But then again, he told me I'd never graduate high school, then that I'd never finish college, and then that I wasn't going to be able to hold down any of the jobs I got after college. So it shows what he knows. Speaking of my dad, I didn't mind the late nights so long as it kept me away from him. I still lived at home and I was saving up for a place, although dealing with my family while I saved was nothing short of a waking nightmare. So much negativity and constant criticism. But I digress. Working late was good for me. Usually the traffic wasn't too bad on the way home either. I could breeze down the highway like it was no big deal, with my music turned up loud. I kind of preferred that to the ridiculous traffic I could have faced if I'd left at 5. I was heading into Cambridge, and that drive was over 2 hours on a good day. Rush hour in Toronto is a form of torture, and anyone who says otherwise is a psychopath. The 401 isn't so much a means of transportation as it is a glorified parking lot / circle of hell. The point I'm trying to make is, traffic at 10 at night isn't normal, but that's where it all started. It was a Friday night. I was looking forward to a quiet weekend of playing Xbox and sleeping in. I'd done my due diligence. Now it was time to relax. But there I was, an hour out of work and stuck on the 401, somewhere between Hamilton and Milton. My Maps app said there'd be one hell of an accident up ahead. It must have been something legendary to completely shut the highway down at that hour. I don't know if anyone got hurt, but at that hour, I didn't care. I'd been going since 7 in the damn morning. This was 10 in the evening. You do the math. I was exhausted. I was ready to doze off at the wheel, and traffic was going so slow that I just knew I was going to be there all night, and I was not having it. No, sir. When the going gets tough, I get off the highway. There was an exit up ahead. I couldn't tell which one. It was in the darkness, but I figured I could work around it. I knew the back roads of the area pretty well, and I knew I could find my way home. Some people say back roads only slow you down. Maybe they're right, but they give the illusion of speed, and sometimes that's just what you need. So I turned onto the back road. It was pitch black, and I didn't see any signs that told me where I was, but it was better than being stuck in traffic. I checked my phone, and after seeing no turns off the road I was on, I zoomed out and started plotting my route home. I knew my Maps app would just tell me to take the dreaded U-turn back onto the 401, and I wasn't going to do that. I figured out what my next few turns should be, and I just kept driving. I'd noticed the tire pressure light was on while I was on the 401, but I figured I could deal with it when I got to Cambridge. I didn't imagine it was that big a deal. I probably shouldn't have hedged my bets on that. When my tire blew, I was in the middle of nowhere. The street I was on didn't even have a name. It had a 6-digit number, and I don't even remember what the number was. I felt the rear driver's side tire go as I drove. I felt the dead weight behind my car, and I heard the sound of busted rubber being dragged behind me. I had no choice. I had to pull over. When I got out of the car, I could smell the burnt rubber. The tire was done. There was no coming back from that kind of damage. I checked my phone. A 3% battery that was fading fast, no backup plan, and no idea just where the hell I was. I wisely wasted the last of my battery trying to figure out that part before I called 911, and then I was just flat out screwed. I stood there for a few minutes in the dark, holding my dead phone and contemplating the questionable choices that had led me to the situation as I mulled over my options. I checked my trunk and took out my jack for the first time, only to find it rusted to hell. I made an attempt to use it on my car, but it never actually changed a tire before, and the jack just flat out wouldn't budge, no matter how much I tried. The only other option I had was to find a stranger, either someone else who would use that road or someone who lived nearby. I'd passed some lights from dark houses on the road, so at least that gave me some hope. Looking around, I was sure I could even see some distant lights. My eyes took a bit of time to adjust to the darkness, but I was sure that just a bit further down the road was a field with a house in the middle of it. There were a few exterior lights on, enough to give me an idea as to where I was headed, anyway. Considering that I didn't exactly have a lot of other options, I got to walking. Slowly, I drew nearer to the distant house. I heard the grass rustling beneath my feet, and I heard animalistic grunts nearby. Pigs, from the sound of it. That was hardly surprising. I was out in the middle of nowhere. I was probably visiting a farmer. The grunts sounded off, I suppose. I was sure they were pigs, but they didn't sound quite right. Then again, I barely knew the first thing about pigs, so I was hardly in any position to judge. I spotted a dark shape in the distance, and I figured that was a barn of some sort. Obviously, that was where the pigs were. If anything, I figured the presence of a barn and pigs was a good thing. Someone would almost certainly be in the house, and they'd be able to help me. This was exactly what I needed. My pace picked up as I approached the house. I could see just a little bit more of it. It was big, at least 2 stories tall, and one of the lights illuminated a quaint wooden porch. As I stepped onto the porch, the wood groaned underneath my weight. The brick exterior of the house was dark, almost black, and looked a bit grungy, but I wasn't exactly bothered by it. Beggars can't be choosers, after all. I knocked on the door as loudly as I could. Whoever was inside was probably asleep. I was actually kind of surprised when I saw a light go on upstairs. I expected it would take a bit more effort to rouse whoever was inside. In the silence of the night, I could hear movement inside the house. I thought I saw a shape in the window, looking down on me before vanishing. For a few more moments, all was quiet. Then I heard the click of the lock behind the door. It opened only a crack, and the man on the other side peered through it at me. I didn't get a good look at him, but I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "What do you want?" His voice was deep, raspy, and mistrusting. "I'm sorry for waking you, sir," I said. I used my best customer service voice. "My car broke down a little ways down the street, and my phone is dead. I was wondering if I could use your phone to call for a tow." The man behind the door leered at me, weighing my words before he scoffed and pulled the door fully open. It was massive, standing a full head taller than me. It was wider than me as well, and had a wild, untanned beard that covered most of his face. His hair was long and fell down to around his waist. It would have fit right in with ZZ Top. "Come on in. Phone's in the kitchen." "Thanks so much, sir." I didn't want to let his generosity go to waste. I stepped inside and let him lead me to the kitchen. His house had seen better days and looked as if someone had started building the interior but never finished. Some of the walls were bare down to the joists. Drywall was torn off in some sections, revealing pink fiberglass insulation underneath. The hardwood floor was scuffed and covered in muddy boot tracks. It wasn't outright filthy, but it was run down. The kitchen was arguably the nicest part of the kitchen, and even that was far from perfect. The sink looked like it belonged in a laundry room. The wooden counters were marked with scratches from being used as cutting boards. Both the fridge and oven were ancient. It was all as clean as it could get, but it still looked like crap. I didn't complain, though. The phone was, unsurprisingly, an old rotary phone. The man picked it up off the hook and, without saying a word or asking me a question, began to dial a number. "You calling CAA?" I asked. "It won't do you any good out here. Got a local friend. He'll get you going again." I opened my mouth to protest, but thought better of it. Car help was car help, right? As the phone started to ring, the massive man pressed it to his ear. "Scott, sorry to wake you, boy. It's Jonah Price out at the pig farm. Got a feller here who's having some car trouble. Was wondering if you might be able to make it down to take a look." I heard a voice respond to him as the man, Price, gave a solemn nod. He glanced over at me. "I got him right here. Let me put him on." He offered the phone, and I took it. The voice on the other end belonged to someone closer to my age. "Evening, stranger. Mr. Price says you're having car trouble." "Yeah, my name's Liam Harper. I was on my way home and I blew a tire. I'm parked on the street. Any idea how soon you can get someone out to take a look at it?" "Not until morning, I'm afraid. I can swing by first thing, though. Help you get everything all set up. You got a jack or a spare?" "I got a spare. I need a jack." "Gotcha. I'll take care of it. Don't worry." The man replied. "I'll be around 6, give or take a bit." "Are you sure you can't send someone out now? It's kind of an emergency." "Son, I am the someone. I'll be out at 6, so hold tight." That was not the news I wanted to hear, but I got the feeling that it was the only help I was going to get. I muttered a begrudging thank you before they hung up. Praise stared at me intently, silent, and with an expression I couldn't read. "I don't suppose you have a spare room, do you?" I asked. I felt a bit embarrassed asking a complete stranger for this, but it's not like I had much of a choice. "Got a couch. It'll do," Price replied, and I wasn't in any position to argue with that. The couch was an ancient flannel thing that sagged from years of abuse from the massive Mr. Price. It wasn't the most comfortable place I'd ever slept, but I was still happy to have it. Price hadn't had anything I could charge my phone with, so that was going to have to wait, but I could live without it. The quilt he gave me was a hand-sewn and warm one, and there was an old throw pillow I could rest my head on. Awful as my day had been thus far, I felt like this was the best possible ending I was going to get. I'd catch a few Z's and be on my merry way in a few hours when the mechanic stopped by. I was tired enough that when the lumpy couch didn't keep me from sleeping for long, I drifted off in Prey's bare living room. It was the slam of the heavy door that woke me up. It took me a moment to figure out just where I was. My mind was groggy and disoriented, but I could hear the heavy footsteps of Prey's outside the window, and I saw his shadow move past it. I sat up, rubbing at my eyes. I instinctively checked my phone for the time, but it was still dead. Some time had passed, though, since the sky was starting to light up. It wasn't dawn, not quite yet, but it was getting there. I absent-mindedly wondered if Praise had any coffee, and if he'd be good enough to share it. Then the distant squeals of pigs stole my attention away. The pigs. I'd forgotten about the pigs. Pig squeals are not the most pleasant sound at any point, but these seemed a lot worse than any squeals I'd heard before. There was a genuine sense of panic in them, a fear I could feel in my core. There was something about it that seemed almost human. It sent a chill through me. It occurred to me that Praise was doing more than just feeding his animals, and I suppose that meant that bacon was probably on the menu for breakfast. I liked bacon. I just didn't like listening to it scream as it was being killed. I stayed in place, listening as the pig screamed before I stood up and went to the window. In the light of the early dawn, I could see the barn I'd passed the night before. Praise was out front and trudging back toward the house. He had something slung over his shoulders, although it was hard to tell for sure just what it was. At first glance, I thought it was a pig, but the shape of the body was all wrong. It was too narrow. The limbs were too long. I wondered if maybe it wasn't a dog or something. But no, it was too big to be a dog. A deer, perhaps. The limbs looked too thick to be a deer, and the head wasn't the right shape. As Praise got closer to the house, I almost could have sworn that what he was carrying was a person. My heart seized in my chest just a little bit as he disappeared around the back of the house. Through the thin walls, I heard a door opening somewhere, possibly a cellar door of some sort. Sure enough, the heavy footsteps and the creak of stairs confirmed that Praise was going downstairs. I heard the rattle of something that sounded like a chain before Praise ascended the stairs again. Like clockwork, he headed back outside to the barn. He was probably getting another pig, or whatever it was he'd brought in. There was no way it could have been a person, right? I heard the sounds from the barn. Those were pigs. I was sure that those were pigs. Was I sure? I've never actually heard a pig squeal in real life before, and even then those squeals had sounded off. It was a crazy idea. It made absolutely no sense. But Prace was headed back over to the barn. I was sure I could find a way downstairs and see just what it was that he'd brought down. What harm could it do, right? It was just a quick look. I turned away from the window and started searching for a basement door. It didn't take me long to find one. The stairs were bare wood, and there was a nasty, rotted, coppery smell coming from down there. It was faint, but present. Still, I walked down those creaking stairs. I saw another set of stairs leading outside in a corner, and I could still hear the screams of the pigs. The air was cold, colder than the rest of the house. This basement had been better maintained than everything else. It was insulated. There was a large room with 2 chest freezers in it, and metal hooks hanging from the ceiling. Hanging from one of those hooks was a shape. The body was too narrow for a pig. I was right about that, but it wasn't quite human either. The lights were too dim to tell exactly what I was looking at. Blood pooled on the floor from the creature's fleshly slit throat, and I recognized what seemed like a porcine hoof at the end of one lifeless limb. This thing was far bigger than any pig I'd ever seen. It was about as tall as I was, and had smooth and leathery skin, and a distorted body that sent an uncomfortable chill through me. Gingerly, I reached out to touch the thing that hung from the hook. Its body turned, revealed its twisted face, and I'll never forget what I saw. The eyes were still open, and they seemed human. That did most of its face. Most of it. The ears were long and pig-like, as was the nose, which elongated into a pig-like snout. The hoof of the thing had human fingernails. Its limbs were bent and distorted. I couldn't imagine that the creature had been capable of walking in life, but then again, all of my logic told me that this kind of creature should not have been. It was in defiance of nature itself. I felt myself starting to retch as I recoiled from that hideous, hybrid creature. My eyes were wide in shock and disgusted, and I nearly tripped over my own 2 feet. Then I heard a low, deep chuckle from the stairs in the corner. "Snooping, are we?" I spun around and was greeted with a looming shape of Jonah Prace. Another human/pig hybrid was draped over his shoulder, and he dropped it unceremoniously onto the ground. Blood pooled from the fatal gash in the throat. The body twitched, and the eye fixated on me in its final moments. I heard a weak wheeze escape the corpse, but that creature was beyond my help. "What the hell is this?" I stammered. Praise stood ominously before me, grinning from ear to ear as if he was proud of the horror show he'd kept down there. "Meat," he replied. "Let's just say the folks in this little community have a very particular taste. Wouldn't do for too many passers-by to go missing. No, sir, so I worked out a little alternative. Pigs fill in the gap just fine. Similar taste, easy to breed and crossbreed." I felt sick to my stomach and recoiled back a few steps. Praise advanced on me slowly. He loomed over me like a monster, and I knew there was nothing I could do to get away from him. "Now, you understand if I can't let you run round willy-nilly. This here's a private business. Wouldn't do to have trade secrets out. But don't you worry. Liam, was it? Don't you worry, Liam. I'll take good care of you. You're going to make an excellent sire. Gotta keep the gene pool fresh, after all." He grinned as one heavy arm shot out towards me. I tried to run, but Praise was faster. He caught me by the shirt and dragged me over to the freezer room. With what felt like no effort, he tossed me inside. I crashed against one of his chest freezers, and before I could stand, he'd closed the door in front of me and locked it tight. I kicked at it. I felt it shake, but it didn't budge. "Hold tight, boy. Get comfortable. I'll deal with you when time permits. Scott's still on his way, ain't he? I'll have a word with him about your car first. Get it towed down to the shop. He'll take good care of it." Praise chuckled. Then I heard his heavy footsteps stomping away as he turned and headed back to work. I listened as he strung up another hybrid carcass on a hook. Then, as he climbed the stairs once more and closed the storm door. I was alone in the basement now, with the only smell of rot and decay to help keep me company. As time slowly drifted by, I could hear Prace moving about the house above me. His thundering footsteps shook the roof above me. The stink of decay that lingered in the air was almost overpowering, and it burned my tonsils as I sat in the dark. I had no idea what was waiting for me. Prace had used the word sire, and I wasn't too keen on thinking on the implications of that. In the low light, I could see that, unlike his upstairs, Praise had taken better care of the rooms in his basement. The unpainted drywall was newer than its upstairs counterparts, but the job had been done on this room was still half-assed at best. There were still missing panels that exposed pink fiberglass insulation. I remembered that there was still more drywall on the other end of that insulation. That said, I also knew I could break said drywall, as long as I got the insulation out of the way. I heard it wasn't wise to touch fiberglass insulation barehanded, but my situation was a little dire, so an exception could be made. This room was not meant as a prison, not long-term at least. Praise must have had somewhere better to hold me, but for now he was preoccupied. The tow truck I'd called was still on its way. He'd need to deal with that first, and then I knew I'd have my window. If I just started attacking the drywall, I knew he'd hear me, and he'd stop me. My timing needed to be perfect. I tugged on the drywall in the room with me. I felt it give just a little. With a little bit of effort, I was able to pry it away from the wall, exposing more fiberglass underneath. I didn't need a large space. I figured I could fit between two joists. All I needed to do was clear out the fiberglass. I heard a knock on the door above me and paused. Praise, heavy footsteps shook the ceiling above me as he went to answer it. "Oh, Scott, right on time," he said. His booming voice was softer and more welcoming than it had been before. "Morning, Mr. Prace. Your guest still around?" "In the basement. He seems, he's become a bit of a more permanent resident. I'll be moving him to the barn shortly. Get some use out of him before I decide what to do with him." Prace let out a chuckle that sent a chill through my spine. I was still quietly thankful that I hadn't called out for help the moment Scott had arrived. Prace was clearly feeding the community with those things. "Smart man. You sure he's secure down in that basement, though?" "I ain't worried about it," Prace said. "We'd hear it. Besides, storm door's locked up. We're up here. No way out. What I am worried about is that car sitting in the road." "Don't worry, sir. My brother's hitching it to the truck as we speak. We'll be off shortly. Still, it'd be remiss of me not to pick up a little something for supper. My wife's been fixing for some of that pork tenderloin you serve." Their small talk was a blessing in disguise, honestly. Praise was distracted and I had a chance to move. The fiberglass was itchy and uncomfortable against my skin, but I didn't have much of a choice but to grab it and pull it out by force. I could see the drywall on the other side, and I ignored the burning itch on my hands and arms to throw my weight against the drywall. Had a feeling you'd ask for that. Got a bit in the fridge from my last pig. Tell you what, it's on the house. My thanks for getting rid of that car. The drywall shifted but didn't break. I'd been hoping to avoid loudly punching through it, But that didn't really seem like an option. I knew that Praise would hear me and then my goose would be cooked. Although, Praise had been stringing up these pig things down there. It stood to reason he was also butchering them down there too. Maybe he had a knife or something I could use. I knew I'd only have a minute or two, at best. Not a lot of time to grab a weapon, but it would make getting out of that house a lot easier. I inhaled before I took a few steps back and charged at the wall. The drywall broke this time, and I clumsily collapsed through it. The hell was that? Praise snapped. I could hear his footsteps above me. He was coming for the basement. I picked myself up and stumbled over toward the hanging carcasses. I saw a workbench nearby and what looked like a leather case that I presume held some knives. Praise was at the top of the stairs. He was coming down fast. I ran for the case and threw it open. Sure enough, there were butcher knives in there that gleamed in the darkness. I snatched up one and turned just in time to see Praise descending the stairs. He surveyed the damage I'd done with minor annoyance. "Suppose I should have put you elsewhere," he murmured. "Still, you ain't got nowhere to run, boy. Put that knife down before you hurt yourself." "Screw you," I snapped. I held the knife in front of myself defensively, but Praise hardly seemed intimidated. He advanced on me, slowly, as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Them knives are expensive, boy. Put it down." In an instant, he was on me. I tried to swing the knife, but he carelessly knocked it out of my hand and launched it across the room. With one meaty fist, he sent me down to the ground. "Boy, you've monopolized more of my time than I am comfortable with," he growled. I tried to pick myself up, but he grabbed me by the back of the shirt and tossed me toward the hole I'd left in his wall. "I suppose it's my own fault. Should have planned for something like this. Should have, but didn't. Oh well." I looked at the fiberglass I'd torn out of the walls. It wasn't so much a plan as it was a really crazy, half-baked idea, but I didn't have a lot of options. Praise was advancing on me again. The floor shook with his every footstep. "Live and learn," the man grunted. He bent down to grab me again, and as he did, I grabbed a handful of fiberglass. In one fluid motion, I stuffed it into his face. Praise let out a frustrated cry and stumbled back a step. I kicked out a leg and sent him tumbling to the ground with a mighty crash. I grabbed more of the torn-out fiberglass, even though it stung my hands. I had a feeling it hurt his eyes even more, and I was more than happy to crush it into his face. One of his massive arms swung and struck me in the head, knocking me aside as Praise clawed at his face. "Holy hell! Jesus! Scott!" I could hear footsteps on the stairs, and I saw a scrawny-looking man race down the stairs. He froze at the sight of Praise, writhing on the ground, ripping fiberglass off his face, and he didn't do much to stop me as I hurried to my feet and ran for the stairs. I body-checked Scott against the wall, stunning him just long enough for me to get past. "Scott, go get him!" Praise yelled, but by then I was most of the way up the stairs and back in the main part of the house. I burst through the front door and into the morning sun. I could see a rusted tow truck by my car down the road. I did consider trying to steal the tow truck, but Scott's brother was still there. By the looks of it, he was a lot bigger than I was, and I was out of tricks. There was only one place to go. In the daylight, I could see a forest behind the long metal barn. It was my one chance at escape, and I took it. I took off at full speed toward the woods, and I made it halfway across the field before I heard the crack of a rifle. I glanced backward to see Praise storming out of his house, gun in hand and taking aim at me. He missed his shot, but I wasn't going to count on that happening again. The barn was closer than the trees, and I ran for it. If nothing else, it would offer me some shelter from the lunatic with the rifle. The agitated cries of the hogs barely registered to me as I bolted toward the barn, and through the open door of it. I didn't think about what would actually be in that barn, not until I was actually inside. I'd seen pig farms on TV before, industrial-looking buildings with metal bars keeping groups of pigs separated. The inside of the barn I was in was a lot like that, but those things in the cages, those things were not pigs, not entirely. Their eyes were the part of them that were the most human. Looking into them, I saw recognition and understanding. I saw sentience. They regarded me with a mortal fear that I understood all too well. The sight of their warped, distorted bodies made me sick. A few of the healthier ones limped to the edges of their cages to look at me. Many others simply lay still, waiting for merciful death. In the barn, I could hear their squeals and screams. I noticed there was something off about them before. Now I could finally put my finger on it. These screams were distorted and sounded almost human. I thought I heard fragments of human speech in there, but I wasn't sure. If these creatures were even capable of speech, they probably had never been able to truly learn it. There couldn't have been more than 40 or 50 of the creatures, but that was still far more than ever should have existed. They looked at me silently, begging me for salvation, but that wasn't something I could offer them. I knew praise was coming, and I didn't have much time. I forced myself to keep running down the single aisle in the center of the barn. I was no more than halfway through the barn when I heard their squeals intensify. I knew that it was praise even before I heard the gunshot. "Get back here!" he snarled. The center aisle was no longer safe. I was a sitting duck. I only glanced back quickly to confirm that praise was lining up his next shot before I leapt into one of the cages. The hybrids recoiled from me at first. Praise fired his gun in an instant after I hit the ground. I could hear his thundering footsteps following me. Glancing at the bars, I saw that they were narrow enough for me to slide through. The hybrids were too wide for them, but I wasn't. Staying low, I slipped through the bars of the first cage and crawled frantically to the bars of the next one. The hybrids watched me suspiciously, but they didn't interfere. If anything, they kept their distance. "Where the hell are you?" Praise screamed. From the sounds of it, he was close, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep running. His footsteps got closer as he stormed down the aisle, and I paused, not wanting to move or risk attracting his attention. I glanced at the door of the cage and spotted the latch for it. It was a simple sliding latch. Praise hadn't locked it. The hybrids didn't have the kind of hands that could open such a latch anyways, but I did. I shuffled toward the front of the pen. Praise had slowed down, checking each pen for any sign of me. It was only a few feet away. I slipped my hand through the bars and undid the latch before I pushed the door open. Most of the hybrids in the pen with me looked up. I could see the gears in their heads turning. Then one of the braver ones stood. It glanced at me, its expression unreadable, before it made a run for it. A few other brave creatures followed it, making a desperate bid for freedom. "God damn it!" I heard Praise snap. The hybrids didn't run towards him. They ran away, but they served as an ample enough distraction. Praise took aim at them and pulled the trigger. This time his aim was true, and one of the creatures collapsed in the middle of the aisle. He stepped forwards into my line of sight, but he hadn't seen me just yet. I lunged for him, catching him off guard and pushing him into the bars of another pen. Praise snarled and swore as I grabbed at his gun. He was stronger than I was. I knew I couldn't wrestle it away from him, but I could cheat. I raised a knee into his groin and heard him grunt in pain. His grip on the rifle slipped, just enough for me to rip it free of his grasp. I'd never fired a gun before in my life, and in my panicked state, I had no time to learn, or even to think. I just aimed it at him and fired blindly. I heard Praise scream. I saw a meaty hand press against his shoulder as he braced himself against the cage for stability, and my pulse spiked. I'd hurt him. I'd actually wounded him. His eyes met mine, burning with rage and hatred. Blood seeped through his gushing wound. If I was thinking straight, I would have fired again, but my brain was running off of pure adrenaline. I'd never actually killed someone before, and in my current state, I'm not sure if I was ready to start. I'd stopped him, and that was enough. I kept my grip on his rifle as I backed up and continued to run for the back of the barn as fast as I could. There was a door near the back, and I burst through it. The tree line was right there. I didn't hear any thundering footsteps. Praise wasn't still after me. I was as free as I was going to get. The woods sat ahead of me, ominous yet safe, and I ran into them, letting myself vanish into the trees. I abandoned Prey's gun somewhere in the woods. I was hardly a gun expert, but I managed to figure out that it was out of ammo. It only seemed to hold about 4 rounds, and I wasted the last of them wounding Prey's. It was a few hours before I made it to the road again, and a few more hours after that, until I found a passing car that I managed to flag down. I went to the police, of course, but it didn't do me much good. I didn't exactly have the best idea of where I'd been in the first place, and what I told them was, well, judging by the look on the officer's face, I don't think he actually believed me. Truth be told, I'm not sure what to do now. It's been a few weeks since my encounter. I haven't heard anything from the police. Nobody's found my car, and I haven't heard a thing about a pig farmer named Jonah Prace. I know he's out there, though. I always know he's out there. At night, I can hear the inhuman scream of the pigs. I can see his burning eyes, and I wish that I'd managed to kill him when I shot him that morning. I know that I got lucky, and I've got a sick feeling that whoever runs into Praise next won't get that luxury. I hope you enjoyed When the Pigs Scream, as written by author Ryan Peacock and performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that first tale and would like to enjoy more tales from tonight's talented feature author, you can help support them by visiting their author profile today. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com/peacock. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/peacock, spelled like the name of the bird of the same name, Peacock. And you'll be redirected to the author's profile on our horror fiction website, creepypastastories.com, where you can learn more about this talented writer and connect with him via his social media outlets, including Reddit, Tumblr, and Twitter, or use the convenient contact link to let them know you enjoyed their work. Again, that's simplyscarypodcast.com/peacock to check out Ryan's author profile today, where you can get in touch, follow him, and show your support. Oh, and if you do, please leave this talented gentleman a kind word, and be sure to let him know you heard about him here on this show. Up next, we've got a second tale of terror for you, courtesy once again of Ryan Peacock. We travel to Norway, where a groupie's love for his favorite band leads him down dark roads. If your parents ever told you those death metal albums would only lead to trouble, well, parents aren't always wrong, you know? Without further ado, I present to you Geitefødsel, The Night of the Goat. In my youth, I had a wild streak. I was a teenager during the years when heavy metal began to get old. The group I ran with was fine with the classics, but they wanted something a little more extreme. We wanted something wild, raw, and unfiltered, and we found it in black metal. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still a huge fan of black metal. It's nostalgic, and all these years later, I've never stopped enjoying it. I can even recommend some truly outstanding bands if you're interested. I can see why not everyone gets the appeal, but I stand by the genre. That said, in the early days, I won't deny that things did get a little bit out there, and I was part of that. At the time, some friends and I had arranged to spend a few months in Norway. The official story was that we were going to study abroad. The truth was, we just wanted to go to see some badass concerts. The best bands were still fairly underground. This was back during the days when Dead was still the frontman of Mayhem, and the scene was still wild. So there was a lot to see. There were a lot of bands creeping around the underbelly of the scene at that time. My friends and I all had different favorites, but mine was Lust. Lust's gimmick was that they had a female vocalist. In fact, most of the lineup was female, including the guitarist and bassist. The drummer was the only man. They were just kids, but man, oh man, did they know what they were doing. They really should have broken out and made it big time, but they didn't have that big of a fan base. Their concerts were so raw and aggressive. Their vocalist, Anna Male, seemed determined to sex up the entire black metal subculture as much as she possibly could. She'd come on stage half naked and strip off her clothes as she performed. She'd smear blood on her breasts and spit blood into the mouths of the two other girls on stage. Looking back on it, I suppose, I used to imagine I had a chance with her. I thought I was just crazy enough to make her fall for me, and I would have done anything she said. The guitarist, Rebecca Olstead, was no less interesting. She was nothing special in regards to the way she played, but she'd typically come out shirtless and wear a taxidermy goat's head. She was the image of Baphomet shrinking dark riffs on the stage, and the audience loved her for it. The head usually fell off halfway through the shows, but Rebecca had insisted it was a metaphor for Satan giving birth to sin through his forehead, and most fans ate that up. The collapse of the goat head was something of a special event at their concerts, and when it fell, the audience would always chant, "Sin! Sin! Sin! Sin!" Ida Wallen was the bassist. Unlike the vocalist and the guitarist, she had less of a gimmick. She typically dressed in all black and had stolen Dead's corpse paint long after he started using it. But that was all there was to her. Then there was the drummer, Thor Egeland. He wasn't the band's first drummer, more of an in-between piece. Their first drummer had been another woman, but supposedly she'd quit. They'd never bothered to replace Thor. He was barely just a kid, but he fit in just fine. We'd been staying in Oslo, but I'd been fine with traveling to try and catch Lust shows. I usually took a bus or caught a ride with a friend, so I could get as wasted as I wanted. The shows were mostly small affairs, little venues with nightly shows of various local bands. Black metal was still small at that time, but there were enough bands to keep a steady rotation going. I was drunk and had smoked most of a joint when I officially met the band. I'm not sure what the hell had gotten into my head, but I'd decided to wait out behind the venue for them after the show. I barely recognized them outside of their concert attire. Rebecca looked almost unrecognizable with her hair tied back and a black t-shirt on. I watched them bringing their equipment into an old van and stepped out to offer some help. I already knew that their English was pretty good, so I didn't bother fumbling my first impression with my butchered Norwegian. "Hey, you guys need a hand?" Anya looked up at me, a little surprised, before giving a nod. "Yeah, we'd appreciate it, thanks." She directed me to their amps, which I was more than happy to help carry. "I loved your show," I said. "I've been following you guys around for a while. You're great." "I'm glad to know someone's listening," Rebecca said. She stared at me intently for a few minutes. I think I've seen you in the crowd before. You look familiar. Thanks. It was all I could think of to say at the moment. When I'd helped them pack up, the inevitable offer for a beer came. They were just being polite. I saw that then, but I was more than happy to indulge. I'd been dreaming of hanging out with Lust for months, and it was basically a dream come true. We sat around their van, probably overdoing it with the booze and shooting the breeze, like we'd known each other for years. So, are you coming to our show tomorrow night? I remember Anya asking me. We'd ended up at a little bar a short ways down the road. It was after midnight and dead silent, but that was fine with us. Thor had left us to go and sleep in the van, so it was just myself, Anya, Rebecca, and Ida alone at the bar. Yeah, I was planning on it, I said. I know they'd be at a slightly larger show with a few more well-known bands. Nice. Well, if you are, maybe you could ride in with us. We could use the help setting up. I'll make sure you're in the front. Maybe we can get a drink after. Sound good? Her words slurred together a little bit. She was clearly drunk, but her proposition still sounded like the best idea I'd ever heard. Yeah, hell yeah, that sounds great, I said. Atta boy, Rebecca replied. You got a car? You can ride in with us if you don't. Now that just sounded like a dream come true. I caught a ride in with a friend, actually, I said. He's probably waiting on me to give me a shout to pick me up, but honestly, I'd be down to ride with you guys for a bit. That was all it took to settle in. They couldn't really pay me for being their roadie, but I was just fine with that. They covered the drinks, and I got to go to a bunch of free shows. It wasn't just them I watched play. There were plenty of other bands. Most of them were small, but a few would go on to be considered synonymous with the rise of black metal. I just didn't see them either. I drank and got high with them. I saw Mayhem, and even hung out with Euronymous and Dead before the latter's suicide and the former's murder. It was awesome, and I got tales to tell, but those are for another day. Right now, I'm only here to talk about how it ended. I'd been traveling with Lust for almost 2 months at that point. During the week, we'd all go back to work, but come the weekend, it was the 5 of us in their little van, going between gigs. Rebecca seemed to manage the day-to-day of the band. Thor was just a kid along for the ride, just like I was, while Anya was in it for the thrills. Ida was the only one I never really got a read on. I'd chalk her up to being like Anya, in it for the thrill, but she and I never really talked much. I spent most of my time with Anya and Thor. They'd just finished a show, and I was helping Thor and Rebecca pack everything up for the night. We were already drunk, and Ida had wandered off somewhere else, although I didn't exactly know where. It didn't matter. We knew she'd be back. Sure enough, she was by the time Thor and I had finished. She wore a coy smile as she approached us, hands in her pocket. We good to go? She asked me. Yep, we're all set, I replied. Are we heading out or getting a drink? I was thinking it might be nice to get a drink, Ida said. I was talking with one of the other bands. They mentioned there's an old stave church a few kilometers south of here. They headed over, so what do you think? She grinned wildly from ear to ear. Hell yes, Thor said. Let's do it. Ida nodded, seeming to approve. Rebecca had joined us and was beginning to crack a smile. Count me in, she said. Should we bring gas? Yeah, we'll grab some on the way, Ida said. I'll go get Anya, then we'll head out. I'll drive. I know where it is. In minutes, we headed towards the church. Thick black forest surrounded it, and I could see the outline ahead of us. It was one of those old Norwegian stave churches. They're a rarity these days, and it's damn lucky we didn't burn the lot of them. They're beautiful, don't get me wrong, but even more beautiful when set alight. There's no one else here, Rebecca noted as we got closer. We're probably just early, Ida said dismissively. I'll just park. Let's get this party started. She was the first one out and went straight for the door of the church. She tried it, and when it didn't open, she called for a tire iron. Anya was more than happy to provide one, and we watched as Ida splintered the wood to let us inside. Thor and I carried the gasoline as we entered the old wooden church. "Look at this place," Ida murmured. "A house of lies." She beckoned to me. "Give me the gas." I handed the gas can I carried over to her and watched as Ida slowly poured the gasoline down onto the floor in a circle around her. Anya and Rebecca moved past her and toward the altar. They looked up at the figure of Christ on his cross before reaching up to tear it down. "Thor," Anya called, "come here. Let's bless this Savior." Thor came running, undoing his pants as he got closer. "You want to bless him too?" Rebecca asked. "I'll even give you bastards something to look at." She started to undo her top before pausing. "Someone's outside," Anya said. "The other band?" I asked, before heading to the door to peek out. There were no signs of another car, no immediate sign that anyone else was there but us. But when I saw them, I swore under my breath. 7 figures clad in black robes emerged from the forest. They advanced on the church slowly, and I pulled back inside. "There's some weirdos in robes," I whispered. Anya and Thor both looked to Rebecca for guidance. The desecrated cross fell to the ground. "Hide," Rebecca said, and we all did as we were told. I found a spot beside Anya. I saw Thor taking cover behind some of the pews, while Ida hid behind the altar. I didn't see where Rebecca went. For a few moments all was still. Then the robed figures entered the church, one at a time. They moved in a slow procession toward the altar before stopping in the aisle. I saw Thor pressed to the ground trying to hide under the pew, although he still craned his neck to see what stood over him. Starting at the front of the line, the hooded figures began to disrobe. The black, formless shapes fell away, and beneath them I saw some of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen in my life. My breath caught in my throat as they stood in the darkness of the church, fully naked and exposed. "Get the boy," said one of the women in Norwegian. 2 of them broke rank and went for Thor. I watched as they dragged him from beneath the pews. Wait, let me go!" He protested and tried to struggle. His pants were still partially undone, and I could have sworn I saw one of the women tugging them off of him. It took 4 women to drag Thor up to the altar. They dropped him in the circle of gasoline that Ida had made before holding him down. Thor looked around, panting heavily. The kid was clearly terrified. This was more than he'd bargained and signed up for. "Are your friends here?" asked one of the women. "No, I'm alone," Thor protested. "Are you?" the women replied and scoffed. She looked at the others around her. "We'll begin now," she said. We watched as Thor was stripped entirely. The women straddled him, rubbing his manhood and guiding him into her. His struggles weakened as he realized what was happening, and from the look in his face, he didn't seem to be enjoying it. The woman on top of him pinned his arms down as the other 6 women let Thor alone and began to walk in a circle around them. Their movements were rhythmic but stiff, almost like a strange dance. Slowly their voices rose together in unison in a chant I couldn't understand. I couldn't see Thor anymore, only heard him cry out before the women switched. Someone else held him down, and the one who just raped him took her place in the circle. "We have to stop this," Anya whispered to me. I looked at her and saw quiet horror on her face. It seemed almost foreign to her. "Can we?" I asked. "There's a lot of them, only 5 of us." "Even enough numbers," Anya said, and I felt her tensing as she prepared to go. But in the moment before she did, we watched as Ida rose up from behind the altar, her mouth moving in time with the eerie chant, and her arms outstretched. "Sisters," she crooned as she finished her last stanza of the chant, "please have your fill of the boy. He is yours, as I promised you. Geitefødsel is upon us. Drink him, eat him." The women switched out again. I caught a brief look at Thor, and he looked downright terrified. Anya remained frozen beside me. Neither of us spoke the questions on our mind, but it was there all the same. One after the other, the 7 women took their turn with Thor. All the while their chant sounded quietly, and we watched in quiet horror, unable to run and too afraid to charge in. But once the women were done, things got even stranger. The women took a step back, and the gasoline Ida had poured was set alight. In the firelight, the women danced around Thor, who screamed out in terror. "Rise!" Ida crooned. "Rise, darling dearest! Rise! 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 Rise!" Women repeated back, and as they did, I heard Thor's scream turn from terror into agony. Through the flames, I could see him writhing on the ground. I could see blood pouring out of his mouth and his eyes wide open in pain. Then came the ripping of flesh. Thor's screams reached a crescendo before they blacked out entirely. Then I saw the shape rising above the dancers. Too large to have been simply birthed from Thor's corpse, but as far as I could tell, that was exactly what had happened. It was pitch black and hard to make out amongst the flames, but what few details I could make out confirmed that it was covered in hair. I could see massive horns jutting out of its skull. "Yes!" Ida shrieked in pure elation, and the creature looked at her before letting out a goat-like bleat. The dancing women fell to their knees before it, and I was finally granted a look at the monster in all its terrible glory. It stood tall, with the head of a goat and the body of a man. Thick black hair covered the creature from head to toe, and it looked around, surveying the church. "No, no, no! Oh my God, no!" The voice came out of nowhere, and from the shadows in the far corner of the church, I saw Rebecca moving. She bolted for the door, and the black goat set its sights on her. Letting out an enraged bleat, it leapt over the dancers and tackled her to the ground. All I heard was the sound of Rebecca's horrified screams as the black goat bit into her skull. Her head was crushed in its massive jaws, and her screaming was cut short. It was all that Anya and I needed to see. As the black goat finished with Rebecca, she bolted, running right for the door, and I ran behind her. The black goat looked up at us, cocking its head to the side, and as we escaped through the door of that church, I saw Ida grinning at us from the altar. "The car, get to the car," Anya murmured. She ran over to where we'd parked it before tugging at the door. It didn't open. No, 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 no! Of course, the door was locked. Ida had driven us over. Ida had the keys. The black goat bleated from inside the church, and we both looked back to see it standing in the doorway. Anya pressed herself against the car, petrified in fear, and as the black goat came for us, lurching forward and bleeding, I gave in to my fear and ran. Anya did not. I heard her cry out as the black goat fell upon her, and listened to the way she screamed as she was torn open. My legs pumped as hard as they could, putting as much distance between me and that monster as was humanly possible. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I looked back only once to see if it was following me. All I saw was that the church was engulfed in flames behind me, and the shape of the black goat against the flames. far away and not in pursuit, but still watching. It watched me until I was long gone. I heard that Ida died in the fire. I don't know if I believe that. It's been years since I followed lust, and since that horrible night, for the longest time, I had no idea what had happened. I didn't want to know. I just wanted it out of my memory for good. But you can't escape the worst things in life. I won't tell you where I heard about it. Demonology is a bit of a passion of mine, and always has been. More so ever since that night. But until now, I've never found an explanation for what I've seen. Most rituals are fake, made up either by superstitious folks or dumbasses. But every now and then you hear about something real. It has a name in Norwegian, but the translation means goat's birth, or the night of the goat. All the records I've found say it has never been successfully completed, but the steps match what I saw that night. On holy ground that has been defiled, 7 virgins must bed a single man. That man is then to be set ablaze, and as he burns, something will be summoned from the depths of hell, but it cannot survive the night unless it is properly bound. In order to be bound, it requires 4 sacrifices: body, mind, heart, and soul. Once it has received them, it is bound to the earth, undying, unfettered, unstoppable. Thor provided the sacrifice of body when he birthed that infernal thing. Rebecca's brain could count as mind. Anya was found outside the burnt remains of the church. Her chest had been torn open, and her heart had been consumed. But what of soul? What of soul indeed? Not a night goes by where I don't hear the terrible bleating of the black goat. I've had more nightmares than I can count. I've left the black metal scene behind, but the marks it has left on me will never go away. So tell me, what of soul? I hope you enjoyed Night of the Goat by author Ryan Peacock, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed the tales you've heard tonight, I'd like to remind you one last time that tonight's featured author would love to hear from you and has a large catalog of tales available for free that are sure to be new to you. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com/peacock. Once more, that's simplyscarypodcast.com/peacock, spelled Peacock, just like the bird. And you'll be redirected to our horror fiction website and the author's profile there, where you'll find a link to Ryan's available social media, where you can follow him for his latest updates, as well as a convenient contact page which you can use to connect with him and leave him a kind word. If you do decide to drop Ryan a line, please let him know you heard about him here on this program and that Otis Jiry sent you. It would mean a lot to me. Thanks again for your support of this show and of tonight's featured author. Now, before we go, I'd also like to take a moment to thank you personally for joining me for this episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference and would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes featuring twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs. or become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, all of it ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube as well at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find releases of my series, Horror Storytime, dating back to 2014. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. Until next week, stay spooky, get some sleep, if you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's otis@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.